August. Heat. I had what I believe to be the most remarkable day in my life, and while the events are still fresh in my mind, I wish to put them down on paper as clearly as possible. Let me say at the outset that my name is James Clarence Witchencroft. I am 40 years old, in perfect health, never having a day's illness. By profession, I am an artist. Not a successful one, but I earn enough money by my black and white work to satisfy my necessary wants. My only near relative, a sister, died 5 years ago, so that I am independent. I breakfasted the morning at 9, and after glancing through the morning paper, I lighted my pipe and proceeded to let my mind wander in the hope that I might chance upon some subject for my pencil. The room, though door and window were open, were oppressively hot, and I just made up my mind that the coolest and most comfortable place in the neighborhood would be the deep end of the public swimming bath. When the idea came, I began to draw. So intent was I on my work that I left my lunch untouched, only stopping work with the clock struck St. Jude's at 4. The final result, for a hurried sketch, was, I felt sure, the best thing I had ever done. It showed a criminal in the dock immediately after the judge had pronounced sentence. The man was fat, enormously fat. The flesh hung in rolls around his chin. It creased his huge, stumpy neck. He was clean-shaven, perhaps I should say a few days before he must have been clean-shaven, and almost bald. He stood in the dock, his short, clumsy fingers clasping the rail, looking straight in front of him. That feeling that his expression conveyed was not much of a horror as utter and absolute collapse. There seemed nothing in the man strong enough to sustain that mountain of flesh. I rolled up the sketch and, without quite knowing why, placed it in my pocket. Then, with the rare sense of happiness which the knowledge of a good thing well done gives, I left the house. I believe that I set out for an idea of calling upon Trenton, for I remember walking along Lytton Street and turning to the right along Gilcrest Road at the bottom of the hill, where the men were at work in the new tram lines. From there onwards, I have only the vaguest recollection of where I went. The one thing which I was fully conscious and aware of was the heat that came up from a dusty asphalt pavement in almost palpable waves. I longed for thunder's promise, to great banks of copper-colored clouds that hung low over the western sky. I must have walked 5 or 6 miles when a small boy roused me from my reverie and asked the time. It was 20 minutes to 7. When he left me, I began to take stock of my bearings. I found myself standing before a gate that led into a yard bordering by a strip of thirsty earth, where there were flowers, purple stock, and scarlet geranium. Above the entrance of the board was the inscription, Charles Atkins, monument mason, worker in English and Italian marbles. From the yard itself came a cheery whistle, the noise of hammer blows, and the cold sound of steel meeting stone. A sudden impulse made me enter. A man was sitting with his back towards me, busy at work on a slab of curiously veined marble. He turned around and heard my steps, and I stopped short. It was the man I had been drawing, whose portrait lay in my pocket. He sat there, huge and elephantine, the sweat pouring from his scalp, which he wiped with a red silk handkerchief. Though his face was the same, the expression was absolutely different. He greeted me smiling, as if we were old friends, and shook my hand. I apologized for the intrusion. Everything is hot and glary outside, I said. It seems an oasis in the wilderness. I don't know about the oasis, he replied, but it is certainly hot. Hotter than hell. Take a seat, sir. He pointed to the end of the gravestone on which he was at work, and I sat down. "That's a beautiful piece of stone you've got a hold of," I said. He shook his head. "In a way it is," he answered. "The surface here is as fine as anything you could wish for, but there's a big flaw in the back. I don't expect you'd ever notice. I can never really make a good job of a bit of marble like it, but it would be quite like the summer like this. I wouldn't mind blasting heat, but wait till the winter comes. Nothing quite like frost to find the weak points in stone." "And what's it for?" I asked. The man burst out laughing. "You'd hardly believe me if I told you. It's for an exhibition. But it's the truth. Artists have exhibitions, so do grocers and butchers. We have them too. The latest thing in headstones, you know." We went on talk of marbles, which sort of best withstood rain and wind, and which were easiest to work, then his garden, and a new sort of carnation he had bought. At the end of every other minute he would drop his tools, wipe his shining head, and curse the heat. I said little, for I felt uneasy. There was something unnatural, uncanny in meeting this man. I tried to first persuade that I may have seen him before, that his face, unknown to me, had found a place in some out-of-the-way corner of my mind. But I knew that I was practicing little more than plausible piece of self-deception. Mr. Atkinson finished his work, spat on the ground, and got up in a sigh of relief. "There, what do you think of that?" he said, with an air of evident pride. The inscription, which I read for the first time, was, "Sacred to the memory of James Clarence Whittencroft, born January 18th, 1860. He passed away very suddenly on August 20th, 19... In the midst of life, we are in death." For some time I sat in silence. Then a cold shudder ran down my spine. I asked him where he had seen that name. "I didn't see it anywhere," replied Mr. Atkinson. "I wanted some name, and I put down the first thing that came into my head. What do you know? It's a strange coincidence, but it happens to be mine." He gave a long, low whistle. "And the dates?" "Well, I can only answer for one of them, and it's correct." "It's a rum go," he said. But he knew less than I did. I told him of my morning's work. I took the sketch from my pocket and showed it to him. As he looked, the expression of his face altered until it became more and more like that of the man I had drawn. "It was only the day before yesterday," he said, "that I told Maria there were no such thing as ghosts." Neither of us had seen a ghost, but I knew what he meant. "You probably heard my name," I said, "and you must have seen me somewhere and forgotten it. Were you at Clayton-on-Sea last July?" "I have never been to Clayton in my life." We were silent for some time. We were both looking at the same thing. The two dates on the headstone. One was right. "Come on inside and have some supper," said Mr. Atkinson. His wife was a cheerful little woman, with the flaky red cheeks of the country bred. Her husband introduced me as a friend who was an artist. The result was unfortunate, for after the sardines and watercress had been removed, she had brought out a Dory Bible, and I had to sit and express my admiration for nearly half an hour. I went outside, found Atkinson sitting on a gravestone smoking. We resumed the conversation at point where we had left off. "You must excuse my asking," I said, "but do you know of anything of which you could be put on trial?" He shook his head. "I'm not bankrupt. Business is prosperous enough. 3 years ago I gave turkeys to some of the guardians at Christmas, and that's all I can think of. And they were small ones too," he added as an afterthought. He got up, fetched a can from the porch, and began to water the flowers. "Twice a day, regular in the hot weather," he said. "And the heat sometimes gets the better of the delicate ones. And ferns, good Lord! He never could stand it. Where do you live?" I told him my address. It would take an hour's quick walk to get home. It's like this, he said. We'll look at the matter straight. If you go back home tonight, and you take your chance of accidents, a cart might run you over, there's always banana skins or orange peels, to say nothing of fallen ladders. He spoke of the improbable with the intense seriousness that would have been laughable 6 hours before. But I didn't laugh. The best thing we can do, he continued, is for you to stay here until 12 o'clock. We'll go upstairs and smoke. It may be cooler inside. To my surprise, I agreed. We are sitting now in a long, low room beneath the eaves. Atkinson had sent his wife to bed. He himself is busy sharpening some tools on an old oil stone, smoking one of my cigars the while. The air seems charged with thunder. I am writing this at a shaky table before the open window. The leg is cracked. Atkinson, who seems like a handy man with tools, was going to mend it as soon as he finished putting an edge to his chisel. It is after 11 now. I shall be gone in less than an hour. But the heat is stifling. It's enough to send a man mad.